Hi, Dr. Carr.
That sound like John Coltrane. That
It was, yeah, John Coltrane. Your ear.
yeah.
You
No,
could name that tune in 3 notes.
no, not even just that simple tone, that aperture as they call blowing through their reed of John Coltrane. We just heard the plot of Sinners.
Yes.
You look too dumb to stay up here, so why don't you walk the earth forever with that 1/8 white woman? But at any rate, we'll get there. Now, your brother came on over. You trust a black woman, you live forever. But at any rate, should have warned people. But that's okay. Y'all know what it is. How you doing?
I was telling you, well, first I just finished up with Otis Moss, Dr. Reverend Otis Moss. We did a little centers conversation through the lens, through that different lens. As people have been, I'm not watching this. This is demonic. It's
It is. It is. It absolutely is.
yes, it's demonic. Hilarious.
It is demonic.
Yes. Is it?
What did y'all? Sure.
Yeah. What? So what is demonic?
Well, now there is the question, isn't it?
Yes.
There is the question.
As you think about the ways in which everything that we are as melanated people in this hemisphere in this time in the last 500 years demonized. We were talking about Birth of a Nation and how in many ways Sinners is the exact answer to that film that set the course of our existence here with the tropes, the mammy, the coon, the the tragic mulatto, the Uncle Tom, all of the tropes that black people with watermelon and fried chicken and raping and all of the things, and then our music is devil music. It's going to send people to hell, and that so many of us have embodied that. And I was sharing with Otis Moss, and somebody got up in the middle of the theater and started telling everybody they were going to hell and stuff. A black woman, during the thing. I'm like,
Of course, you had to do that. You got to defend your God in every way, especially in those places. You got all
really?
them people getting misled by the devil.
How small is your God that they need that got your God
Well,
stand up in the middle of a theater and
well.
that I don't see that Jesus did. Jesus went somewhere and people came to hear him.
We talking about Jesus or Christians?
I don't. Oh yeah, there are two different things in this
Yeah, I think they're
conversation,
two
right?
different things, right? Or not? Maybe. Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. Very interesting. Interestingly, the stock characters, the stereotypes you discussed and you described. I was looking around to see if I see my paperback copy. I don't see it.
Or Donald
Sterling,
Mosel.
no, Sterling Brown.
Oh,
Sterling Brown actually wrote the author of that poem, Slim Greer Goes to Hell, which is part of a series of poems about this fictional character, Slim, that he published in the early 20s, early 30s, because actually, well, I'll get to that in a minute. But Sterling Brown wrote a book called The American Negro in Drama and Fiction. And he is one of the first, if not the first, to label those stereotypes you just talked about. So Bogle is riffing ironic. Ancestors don't make any mistakes. We didn't talk about this. Sterling Brown is the one as the analyst of these archetypes that puts the name on some of those, most famously the tragic mulatto, who we see, of course, at the center of Sinners. So this is all in divine order, which of course is the message of Sinners. So anybody standing up saying that y'all going to hell has embraced a sad version of the spirituality. We, as Del Orlando's character says, we brought what we had on the boats with us. And somewhere we've been diseducated out of that, because there's no devil in Sinners. It's so crystal clear there is no devil in Sinners, because there's no devil in Africana ways of knowing. let's be very clear. And in case anybody was mistaken to understand that, all you got to do is listen to a few of the interviews that Brother Coogler has made when he talks about the fact that, y'all talk about the devil and Robert Johnson selling his soul at the crossroads to the devil. And he said, yeah. Then I started doing some research and found out about Papa Legba. And he started about voodoo. And I said, yeah, but Papa Legba's granddaddy was Eshu from Ifa, sitting at the crossroads. There's no devil. What there is a narrow Western worldview that must shoehorn us in a binary between good and evil. And then you got to pick a side. And of course, you're not going to pick evil, which makes your soul well up when that thing reaches in your spirit, and you are want to have your head combat your spirit, because I suspect that sister jumped up because her spirit was being pulled and she felt like it was demonic possession, and it wasn't. You should have listened to Wumi and given yourself over to that thing, sis. But I know you scared. Don't worry. You'll live forever. which might not be the reward. But anyway, we'll get to that in a minute. So don't fall for the vampires. Shout out to the Catholic Church. Anyway. And you know what's interesting? The character in Slim Goes to Hell, that poem starts with Slim going to see St. Peter.
Right.
How
happened?
Peter was like, go down there and see what it is. He come back, what'd you learn? Oh, you didn't learn nothing. You know what? Going back down there, because clearly, you know. But of course, tomorrow, on Saturday, I guess today in Vatican City soon, they're going to put, of course, the Vicar of Christ, the Pope Francis, into the vault at the Basilica of St. Peter. So, I mean, it's very interesting how, you know, how sinners open on the weekend when the Vicar of Christ, St. Peter, man. You know? So anyway, you know, if nothing else, everybody should move out of that theater. Everybody really, but certainly African people, reminded, introduced to, comfortable in, anchored in the concept and the reality that all is in divine order and that our ancestors always have us. Don't be scared of that. Lean into it. That's why we here. So anyway, so you ventured forth. I know you don't really like to be going out in them streets like that.
I knew I had to. This little echo.
Yeah. Why you say you had to go?
You know, everybody was talking about it, and I think there was one interview that Ryan Coogler did. That it wasn't when he was talking about the film, why he shot it on what he shot it. I didn't care about that. But when I started to see that this was more than just a vampire, because, you know, and I didn't even put together, it was Easter Sunday, you know, that weekend, to your point, then the Pope dies. But when he started, we've been in class now for 5 years. And I remember the class on the Crossroad. I remember the class on the, you know, the Jolly and the Doma. And I remember, you know, some of those very first discussions about Beyonce. And, you know, there's always kind of been, and there's no struggle because it's all in alignment. And if it's all of God, if you believe in a God, like, you know, the way we've been taught, then it's all of God, right? It's got to be all of God. And, you know, it's the yin and the yang. And it's in all of us, and the battle is really inside of us to determine whether we're going to love, whether we're going to be fearless, because these are the opposites, right? The opposite of faith is fear. You know, it's not hate and love; it's fear and love. Those are the conflicts. And so I said, let me see, you know, what he's going to do. And from the beginning, I was sharing with Otis Moss I could smell the dirt road. I could smell, you know, the opening scene. You're like, something done happened. But then as we're coming into this story, I felt home, and I had to be in a theater to see that. I knew that this was not something I could watch from on my streaming platform.
No question. What are the do you have a sense of the latest numbers? I mean, you know, I was, well, not tracking, obviously, I don't have firsthand knowledge, just reading what the reports are, but I guess the projection is that the film will go over 100 million this weekend, and you know, Variety is already backpedaling in terms of rewrite. But thank the ancestors for Black self-determination. Shout out to Mike Harriet and Contraband Camp, and Brooke Ori wrote a nice piece on Contraband Camp under the headline with Sinners, White Hollywood is moving goalposts on Black cinema again. But you know, for this brother to be at not yet 40 years old, the highest grossing Black director in history, and as he corrected Amy Goodman in what I think is one of the, I haven't seen a better interview so far, but in you know, I haven't looked at many.
Can you pause for a second for people who don't know Amy Goodman, Democracy Now, and
how
long she has been? And I think about, we're in a time, you know, where we're coming out of this age of influencers and people rising, you know, meteoric rises in media, like with no grounding in anything journalistic, anything substantial. This woman has been in the soil for so long, doing this work, you know, independently, you know, for so long, just just plowing along with clarity. She's going to just ask good questions. She's going to center humanity. And that's why, there's no coincidence. But continue, please.
No, it's very important. What you're raising is extremely important. I haven't seen Amy Goodman in a long time. In fact, last time I saw her was after Bobby D. Gregory made transition and Pacifica broadcast his funeral. And she was part of the team. Shout out to Katia Stitt. It was 4 of us. This is before Aski Muhammad made transition. That's the last time I got a chance to sit with her and sit and talk. And you're absolutely right. In fact, she starts this interview, which was broadcast on Democracy Now! It's a strong 30 minutes, a little over 30 minutes, by saying that one of the reasons that she was talking with him is because 12 years ago, she was there and interviewed him around Fruitville Station. He and his wife, Zinzi, were there. And so this wasn't a new thing for her. Like, to your point, she wasn't jumping on this bandwagon. She was like, well, you remember then when we were talking to you, and then they talked about that and said, when you come back. And so the idea that this has happened over the last dozen years, one of the young brothers who was one of Coogler's partners on Fruitville came east and came to campus, and we talked a long time about what they were trying to do and planning to do. And in the space of a dozen years, of course, with Black Panther, and he talks about how each of these films fit in the long arc. And of course, his student film, he was at USC when he met the Swedish kid, Ludwig Göransson, who they went to film school together. And so his first film, that little 6-minute short, was he scored, he did the score for it. He did the sound for it. And so, what is this white boy doing? This white boy who is literally named for Ludwig van Beethoven. It's like, yeah, but there's the story there, and we'll talk more about that as well. But Amy Goodman, to exactly what you're saying, is someone who didn't come to Ryan Coogler recently. And it's still very interesting, though, that even as she is as grounded and conversant as probably most white people, as any others, with regard to this kind of broad worldview, global kind of perspective, even then, Coogler is talking with her in some ways that are going to be over her head, but not over the head of regular, everyday African people. Some of the things will not be unfamiliar, but like the sister who stood up and was rebuking everybody in the name of Jesus, I guess, it wasn't because the thing was unfamiliar to her. It was because it was familiar. And that creates a dissonance, which I think is the genius of this film. And I see everybody here in the Nubia side, and I'm sure people will be saying this in the YouTube side in the morning. So let's be clear. There are some spoiler alerts, but we're going to try to keep this on themes and scenes because, for me, the narrative is the least important. The plot is the least important part of this film.
I was saying to people, afraid of sport. It's not Freddy Krueger. This is not Scream. There are no plot twists. This is culture somehow he was able to put our culture into a film, masking as a vampire movie, but it's an experience. And for people who, I've seen so many people, maybe it's over my head, I don't get it. I'm so sad for you if you could sit in that theater and not get it. So what work can someone do? Especially if they're Black and they don't get it. What do they need? Where do they start, Dr. Carr?
Where they are. I think study is the key word here. And today I want us to, I know we will, because this is the standard we aspire to and try to meet week after week, to slow it down. So many people, when I went to see it, so many people, and this is a theater going community who has seen Black Panther and Wakanda forever. So the gesture she should have known, don't get up. And so what I've been telling people, even those who are not saying anything, don't leave the theater till the lights come up. Do not do that. And so first of all, I want to see it in IMAX. And shout out to everybody who is commenting here in the Mbangi who went to see it at the 70 millimeter, because I would like to see it. I know you're not going. I mean, and people like Nasi, there's a theater in Texas, there's one in Georgia. Cat drove from Columbia down to the 70 millimeter that's in Georgia or near the coast to go see it. I think 3 hours she drove to go see it. And I'd like to go up there in Manhattan maybe at some point if I can get out here and go see it. But if I don't, that's fine too. But I think what was striking, I think it's probably striking to you and everyone else, to see a theater. The movie came out on Thursday.
Yes.
Yes. So at the onset of Easter weekend, to see a theater that was not every seat filled, but was maybe 3/4 filled in the wake of an Easter weekend, on a Monday afternoon, on a Sunday afternoon. Sorry, that's Siri talking to me. Is that Siri or Alexa? I don't know. That's machinery. It's not real. Anyway,
Tell her to shut up. We doing
I would, but then she probably say something crazy. But anyway, that's not, but it will say something crazy. I am making it anthropomorphic. But yes, to see that, realizing that people are paying to go into IMAX, and it's not a cartoon movie where you're taking your children. It's not the typical pablum fare. It's not the Marvel blockbuster. It's a Black film, unapologetically Black. It's not a race film, which is a critical distinction. Some people came from me, and I invited them in to have some tea and conversation around the fact that I said you should throw Us, Get Out, and Nope in the trash. And they say, we shouldn't compare. Oh, I absolutely will. With pleasure. Let's talk. So at any rate, the point is that those are race films. You're dealing with the complexity of race, and they're necessary. They fit an art, but this is not a race film. This is a culture film. And for African people, on word of mouth, really, because not like these people went to an advanced screener and but I think, let me know what you think about this, because one of the things as I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, well, let me not say what I'm thinking. Let me ask you, how strong is the bond between Ryan Coogler and Black movie-going audiences? In other words, what is the level of expectation that Black people have? Forget the theater-going public. What do you think about that? Is there a relationship there that we should?
Yes. Yeah. I think about it. I remember, I'm old enough to remember Tyler Perry, the very first Tyler Perry film. And I remember how proud I was when it was #1. Diary of a Mad Black Woman. Was it that? What I forgot which one it was, but I remember I was at WWRL at the time. That's how long ago it was. And that first week, I couldn't wait to come in and talk about it, because that was a man that had plays in areas. And I remember having this conversation with Elin Harris before he made transition. I published his last book, and I was thinking about Amy Goodman, because Juan Gonzalez and I worked together at the Daily News. He was a columnist. So like those connections, and again, to be this age, to know that I've touched all of these different things. So I'm not talking. I'm talking out of knowing. But I remember, coming in and being so proud, because this man went to places. Elin Harris said, I want to go back with this last book and go into Arkansas, Little Rock. I want to go into the backwoods of Tennessee. And I want to plan a book tour where I go back, because he used to sell IBMs out of his car. And he became successful, 100,000 books, which is incredible. Feeding people in places that nobody, and Tyler Perry, that was his motto. I'm going to do these plays in these places where people, it's not New York, it's not California, Los Angeles. I'm going to do it in places where people never get to be seen. And in many ways, Ryan Coogler is that in terms of cultural meaning making, which
absolutely.
We talk about. So
that's right.
Yeah, yes,
he absolutely is, with the added layer that we can all accomplish, and that is to take ourselves serious enough to not only be in love with ourselves, because I have, Tyler Perry's in love with Black people, Elin Harris is in love with Black people, but to take that love and do the ultimate act, which is to know who we are. And that doesn't come from intuition alone. That comes from study. What Ryan Coogler does is study. You understand? And so we'll talk more about that in a minute. Tyler Perry, it's not a critique of Tyler Perry.
And these things can sit, because I think there are levels to it. First, we have to be seen and acknowledged, right? And that's what both Elin and Tyler Perry said, is I see you. You are important to me. I see you. You're valuable to me. And so I'm serving you, whoever the you is, right? What Ryan has done is, I see you. Now you need to see yourself. You need to see you as I see you. You need to see you as you actually are in history. And I'm going to do all of the things. I'm going to read all of the books. I may not sound like it, and that's okay, because I'm also doing something. I'm training them folk how to not see us when we come. So he came in like smoke into the movie. He came in the movie industry like smoke.
Yeah, he did.
Not smoke the character, but like smoke. You didn't see him.
No.
Now
And now that he's here, he can't be removed.
cannot.
And that's and that is a difficult. It's pregnant with opportunity, and also fraught with danger. And it's interesting in listening to him when he combines these two things. He talks about being in Mississippi for the first time, where his grandmother's brother-in-law, his grandmother's sister's husband, who was the oldest black male in the family for years, and he was off shooting Creed in, of all places, Africa, doing scenes when his great uncle made transition. His great uncle's wife is who Sammy is named for in the film. So I mean, but I'm bringing that all up to say that it's a beautiful thing to see and to feel and to experience the work of constant learning, because he's not making any mistakes. And by that, I mean, he's not making errors. What he's doing is learning, and he's sharing that learning. The spirit of generosity is animating this young brother. And I say young brother, but as he talked with Amy Goodman about that.
Young to us, yeah.
Well, young to us for sure.
40, he ain't 40.
He ain't 40, but he makes this point. He says, you know, I am what they would consider an elder millennial, but there's a generation after me. And if we look at our conceptual categories, the science and technology category in particular, he said the young people now, the younger filmmakers, he said, because she asked him, what message do you have for younger filmmakers? And then she said, well, I could say younger, but you're young. He said, no, let me be clear. I have a message to all filmmakers, young or old. He said, don't be an aspiring filmmaker, make your film. And so this is what, make your film. And then he said, and he said that the younger people, the people coming up after me in terms of age, have the advantage of these cell phones. He said, I look on YouTube and I see this stuff and it's amazing. He said, and then he said, it is not an advantage in terms of their psychology, but in terms of making movies, it's an advantage. This young man is very, very prescient, because it's destroying, and it can potentially destroy our ability to sit and be quiet. You can't make a film like he made without being deeply thoughtful. And we'll explore some of those things as we kind of run it through the conceptual categories. But what you raised there is very important, because there's a vulnerability, there's a generosity, there's a collective dimension. He talks about his wife, who's co-producer Zenzi of the film, who's right there with him. He said, when I miss something, she gets it better than I could have. And when I put it one way, she puts it in. And as he's talking, I'm thinking to myself, oh, she the one, when y'all can't understand that Bay Area hood, she's coming in to, I can see it now coming out. He's not by himself. He's never been by himself in that regard. But the pairings, talking about fear, talking about anxiety, talking about guilt, he said, when he went to Mississippi, and saying, I'd never been here before. My people came from here. You know, my great uncle was raised here before he got out. And then saying at the same time, guilt and inspiration. This is at the center of Black life. For a man to call himself a foundational Black American, and then I'm listening for the fingerprints of a race hustler like Mr. Hidden Colors, and in the same breath say, as an African in America, I'm saying there's the resolved tension right there, because these are not co-equal things. And I'm also hearing somebody who's still on the journey.
Can we pause there for a second?
Because absolutely.
If anyone is looking to build a wedge between us, in this time, shame on you. It's not necessary. It's counterproductive.
It's lethal.
And it is lethal. Yes. And I just, and I get it, because we have been conditioned over the last 20 years to build brands and commerce around themes. We haven't spent a lot of time in community, right? So the communities that were built for commerce sake, not for learning, not for growth, not for, our development. Those times should be over.
I agree. Now, I don't know that they ever will be, though, because I think they're hardwired into the human condition. And we are so far down the road. In fact, where is it? I just found this book. No, that's not the one. I must have put it in maybe I put it in my bag, because when I went to the station this morning, I was starting to read it, And no, oh my gosh, there's a new book out. This guy is an Asian guy. It's called The Once and Future World. And the case he's making, in fact, that's going to bother me until I find it, which bothers me because I don't know what I did with the book. Well, I always take the dust jackets off when I leave the house because I don't like to mess up. Well, here we go. There's the book. Here's the dust jacket. And so I'll put it back on because, for me, they say, oh, dust jackets protect your book. I'm like, why would I need a book when I got a hardcover book? I'm leaving the dust jacket so it'll be pristine when I come home. It's the book, The Once and Future World. This is the guy.
World Order.
World Order, yeah. Once a Future World Order. Thank you. Once a Future World Order. And here he is, Amitav Achayara, who is a journalist, Indian born. And I picked it up because this is the overleaf. It says, since the dawn of the 21st century, the West has been in crisis. Social unrest, political polarization, and the rise of other great powers, especially China. Shout out to the Chinese who are like, we ain't negotiating with you. I know you over there signing them worthless ass piece of papers and your people shoving in front of you, bro, but we're going to break your whole back up. Anyway, especially China threatened to unravel today's Western-led world order. Many fear this would lead to global chaos, but the West has never had a monopoly on order. Surveying 5,000 years of global history, political scientist Amitav Achara reveals that world order, the political architecture enabling cooperation and peace among nations, existed long before the rise of the West. Moving from ancient Sumer, India, Greece, and Mesoamerica through medieval caliphates and Eurasian empires into the present, Achara shows that humanitarian values, economic interdependence, and rules of interstate conduct emerged across the globe over millennia. He goes on to say that history suggests order will endure even as the West retreats. In fact, the end of Western dominance offers us the opportunity to build a better world where non-Western nations find more voice, power, and prosperity. Instead of fearing the future, the West should learn from history and cooperate with the rest to forge a more equitable order. That's a beautiful vision. It's accurate. I already read the first maybe 40 pages, which is embarrassing to him because the first chapter is called First Foundations. So he does anchor, but he doesn't anchor. He gestures toward and kind of mentions in the same breath as the Sumerians, the Egyptians, which is how the West, and unfortunately a man like this who is not Western, continue to misnarrate global history because you can't have this conversation without Africa. And so I understand that. But the chapter 2, then he goes right the way we go, which we spent about a month on when we did the social structure category. Greek myths and Persian power. So he goes to the Greeks again. It's like, bro, here you go. You did it again. I ain't mad at him.
No, but I think there's a message here. Much the way I left the movie theater thinking this is the way forward.
Yeah.
A lot of people are mad about the deal. How dare he have ownership of his work? He's going to have ownership at 25. It's like mad about how much money he's getting first fruit. Yeah, from his work. He's getting first fruit. Yes.
From his work.
Yes. But I also think, to your point where you said it's also dangerous because I think about, we talked about Birth of a Nation, but even before Birth of a Nation, we have watched this virus of evil. I'm gonna call it evil for lack of a better word.
No, of course. In this context, it is evil.
We've watched it evolve because at each turn they were like, oh, that drum is how they deliver messages. Okay, we got to ban the drum. Oh, that music, the words. Wait a minute, what are they actually saying? Okay, 2 or more can't be gathered. Nope, let's break them up. Oh, what they did in Haiti, there was like 200 of them. Overtake. Okay, no more. Let's spread it out. Can't be more than 10 on a plantation. Like at each turn, oh, let's miscegenate or rape. Let's rape these women. Okay, we can't bring them from Africa anymore. Let's build whole plantations where we breed with our own seed. And then let's change the law. Status of the child follows the status of the mother because before that, it was the father because we were in the patriarchy. But no, not for this because we got to make more this. And then let's dehumanize them because, our God says we shouldn't be doing this to people, but we got to make sure people don't think they're people. And even the people we don't think are people, we got to make them think they are people, even though we don't think they're people. Like all of this. And then let's put it in books. Let's put it in books and then make it illegal for them people to read. And then we'll give them another kind of book. And then we'll have their own people preach to them. And then we'll give some of them money, and then they'll think they're free or equal. And then we'll have them go and destroy like over 400 years. It's a drumbeat that keeps going.
It is.
We
And
have a chance to reverse engineer right now. We're so close. We're so close.
well, to you, right? What you raised when you say he loves us, he wants us to know, and then the burden is on us. The opportunity is on us to know ourselves, as you said. The narrative, which is absolutely a social structure narrative, what you just outlined is absolutely why we had to have the Africana Studies Framework, because that's the social structure rendering. What Sinners does an excellent job of doing is reminding us that that is a counter narrative. What we take as the narrative is the counter narrative. And in the governance formation, who we are to each other, that's the narrative. But the social structure renders it a counter narrative. So in other words, it's like, okay, well, Black people have come up with counter narratives to, in fact, the New Yorker just came, I just got this in the mail today. It's the April 28th issue. And by the way, I'm gonna hold your hands. We're gonna jump off this public cliff together for 5 seconds. Happy birthday, and me too. And we got the little window. And happy birthday to everybody else. August Wilson, and Ella Fitzgerald, and all Coretta King. Exactly. So now that we did that, we can keep going. But this is the April 28th issue of the New Yorker, and the writer here, Richard Brody, has written a review. Everybody writing reviews now. This is Consuming Passions on there. Of course, is Michael B. Jordan in the use of technology playing both roles. He writes, Coogler presents a provocatively Africanist view of Black American experience and does so with exuberant inventiveness. The uncompromising political essence of his allegorical vision is expressed with aesthetic delight. Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's about as good a social structure rendering as you're going to get. I accept that for what it is, a social structure rendering. And what I'm saying is, as you just outlined, this serial attempt to convert us. Even now I'm thinking about the great Caribbean thinker Sylvia Wynter, now well into her 90s, who talks about, and we've talked about her many times here in class, the creation of the human as a concept. To even say that we are dehumanizing is to center humanity at the center of creation. So to say that they dehumanized us is, yeah, but Sylvia Wynter's thing is, well, why would you want to be human anyway, the way they construct the idea of humanity? And so, when we say, well, they wouldn't let us read, we never stop reading. The canon narrative is that there was a 26 character script-based system called the alphabet that we gave birth to as Africans, and the Phoenicians picked up on it and mixed it with some other things, and now we have those characters to express sounds. And yes, they set it up so that we would be denied access to that because they thought that that is the only way to read. No, that's a counter narrative. The narrative is communications. We never stopped communicating, which is why, and again, and I want to say this too, for folks who, are here or will be here over the arc of the next week or even beyond, because I think that this moment of us having this conversation this week will probably echo into subsequent times, like that Dave Chappelle conversation we had. And so, taking that responsibility that we do every week to have this conversation, I can't wait for office hours on Monday night for everybody in Nubia so we can continue it as more and more people see it. Being very mindful of not really going into a frame by frame, scene by scene plot kind of discussion, and more for the people who have not yet seen Sinners, maybe encouraging folk to be still, to experience it in the fullness, to listen very deeply, and perhaps alerting folk to some moments that you don't want to miss, even though I suspect many people, like both of us, and some are probably going to go see it more than once. But in that process, let me just kind of think about this for a minute in the context. We started with Sterling Allen Brown, Slim in Hell, for a couple of reasons. One, because of Sterling Brown. And, even though almost all my stuff, with the exception of this few rooms of working library, is packed up in storage, there are a few things that I keep close simply because they are not only very important resources, they are totems. in many ways. By totems, I mean spirit objects, objects of power. And this is one of them. This is the 1941 edition of the Negro Caravan. This is the Negro. This is the best anthology of writing by African people produced up to then, up to 1940 in the United States. Really anywhere, because print culture was everywhere, but you didn't have the resources. This was edited, as you see. This is HBCU time right here. This is the Negro Caravan, if y'all can see it. Writings by American Negroes selected and edited by Sterling Allen Brown, Howard University, Arthur P. Davis, Virginia University, and Ulysses Lee, Lincoln University. This is when our best academic thinkers were at HBCUs. And many of them continue to be at HBCUs, but it's a different world now. I raise it because Sterling Brown's poem, Slim in Hell, he included it here. It's on page, begins on page 383, if you can see. If you've seen Sinners and you listened to the first 3 minutes as we opened today, and after we finish, I would encourage everybody to go back and listen. And everybody here, thousands in Nubia, tomorrow when it releases in the morning over in YouTube, take a second, go over and click that like just to keep the algorithm going. But as you go back and listen here, you will hear the poem. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but it begins. It's actually, interestingly enough, if you could see it rather than just hear it, it is divided into 3 movements. The first movement is Slim getting sent to Earth by St. Peter. The second movement is when he's navigating the earth. And the third movement is when he comes back, as you heard. And when it begins, this poem, Slim in Hell, Slim Greer, a kind of every man, every person for the Southern African person. In the 1930s, this is where the film is set. Ancestors on this. When he says, Sterling Brown, who himself was from the area here between Virginia and Washington, D.C., father was on the faculty of Howard University for many years, grew up between D.C., where he was born, and a farm in Virginia, actually Maryland, where he, grew up. Very famous poet, very famous critic, very famous teacher, a master teacher. The only film done on him was Sterling Brown After Winter. The film, of course, made by Haile Garima and his students, which included Shrikiana Garima. And so, and Haile is very, very mindful and judicious about who has that film. He didn't give it up to where the Sterling Brown papers are now, which is Williams College, which is where Brown went to undergrad after he graduated from Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School. No surprise, he was in D.C. And, Howard, some kind of way, allowed the Sterling Brown papers to slip through their fingers. Unforgivable. But after all, we give them grace. But at any rate, they didn't get After Winter. So if you want to see After Winter, here in Nubia, we always remind folk of when Haile has a screening. You have to come to D.C. to see it, at least at this stage. But at any rate, you see Sterling Brown, the master teacher, sitting in his office in Founders Library on the 3rd floor, around the corner from where my office is. So I take that as a special responsibility to Sterling Brown, and think about that. And as I was sitting there watching the film, I was thinking of, many things, and we'll talk about some of them in the next few minutes. Thinking about Sterling Brown, Slim in Hell, which begins, Slim Greer went to heaven. St. Peter says, Slim, you've been a right good boy. And he winked at him. You've been a traveling rascal in your day. You can roam once more. Then you comes to stay. I'm going to stop right there. Smoke and stack in Slim Greer. So the idea of 2 humans, there really aren't 2 humans. When the white man, the Klansman, asks them, y'all brothers? Nah, we cousins. They're signifying, they're clowning, but they're also making the point. Our relationship is kind of indicative of all the relationships. We can, in other words, because we all can, just like we all sinners, but we will come to that in a minute. But Sterling Brown doesn't need 2 figures in the narrative. He just needs one, Slim. Slim is coming from the ancestral realm to Earth. And by the end of the poem, he realizes that Earth is hell, if you're going to use that metaphor as hell. And you left the place that you want to go. And so the experiences he has as he gets into in section 2, for example, when Sterling Brown writes, took him in a room where Slim see the preacher with a brown skin on each knee. Oh, it was good to see Saul Williams in the role that he was in as the father, as the minister. He didn't evoke not Saul Williams, but Ryan Coogler in writing, directing, producing this. He didn't evoke the tired trope of the preacher, the philanderer, the trope of the preacher, even going back to Oscar Michaud and Body and Soul, who plays that philandering preacher, but Paul Bustle Robeson. And he didn't bite at the role of the over-sanctified hypocrite or person who is deeply flawed, maybe permanently so, like, for example, the gesture toward Alice Walker's Color Purple, not the book, but the gesture toward in the movie by Steven Spielberg, who of course swung and missed in his film, The Color Purple, when the reconciliation that doesn't give you the background. When Suge Avery walks into the church, maybe God's trying to tell you something and reconciles with her preacher father, but you don't really get a sense, one-dimensional figures. But what you see in Ryan Coogler is a deeper understanding of the complexity of Black life. And in that complexity of Black life, you see a figure, a minister, as a point of entry, who, while he doesn't have a lot of lines, it kind of elicits a bit of the tension in a way that I think is more developed in some ways than some of the other films and some of the tropes. But at any rate, as Brown is going on, he says, show them giant stills going everywhere with a passel of devils stretched, dead drunk there. The big boy, Brother Omar, who played the bodyguard, the door guarder in the film. And again, not reliving any plot lines, but just kind of gesturing toward these types, because these types are what are the resonant chords of a film like Sinners. Then he took him to the furnace that some devils was firing, hot as hell, and Slim started a mean perspiring. White devils with pitchforks threw black devils on. Slim thought he better be getting along. So I could go on, but the point I'm trying to make is what he encounters on Earth, Slim Greer, is what Smoke and Stack encounter on Earth, which is the deep flaws, not only of human beings, but especially of human beings in a social structure that engender the deep flaws. In fact, they require the deep flaws. You know, the idea that some of these critics in the white critics and some of the misled Negroes who don't have a deep understanding, saying that it's implausible, not implausible is too generous. It's, I don't want to say absurd because I overuse that word too, but it's maybe not understandable that there would be, or not credible is maybe a better word, that there will be a reverse migration in 1930. Because of course we hear the great Joe Williams, going to Chicago, sorry that I can't take you. Everybody try to get to Chicago. They get them Chicago defenders thrown out the back of the trains by the Pullman porters in the 30s and 40s. They try to get to Chicago. But guess what? Some people came back. And guess what? As implausible as some of these critics who don't know history think it is, perhaps you would want to go talk to somebody like Theodore Roosevelt, the Howard, T.R.M. Howard, Dr. Howard, the surgeon, who had a big house in Chicago and a big house where Mamie Till stayed in Mount Bayou, Mississippi. Don't play with Black people. Ryan Coogler has done his homework. There were people who came back. Guess what? Whatever they had in Chicago, they went up there for a push and pull factor, as a social scientist would say, being pushed out by the oppressive conditions of what we often refer to as apartheid here in this country. And it was so refreshing to hear in some of the interviews I've seen with Ryan Coogler, him refer to it as apartheid. Jim Crow, Jane Crow as well, but apartheid, very important, especially since I remember when Black Panther debuted and they screened it here in the DC area at the Air and Space Museum on their IMAX screen. And I remember Paul Coates was there because he was there with Ta-Nehisi, because Ta-Nehisi and Ryan Coogler did a talk back after the film. And so sitting there, one of the things Ryan Coogler brought up was, as he was shooting, as they were shooting, he says, we're traveling around, we're in South Africa, and I'm seeing all these families with all these members of the family, intergenerational, with a lot of young people you know, we're in a township, or we, you know, and they all sitting out in their yard, or they're out in front of where they live. And he said, this looks so familiar to me. He said, remind me of the Bay Area, remind me of Oakland, where the wealth in a community is the people, not the money. So you basically put all your people on the front porch and say, they go to Johnson's, or they go to Mandela's. In other words, these my people. This is where my wealth is. And so the idea of a reverse migration in a social structure rendering, a social science rendering, would be, well, these people left for a better life. No, but they took with them the most valuable thing they had, which was their people, and their people are the ones who had their culture. So while you get the electric blues in Chicago, where you get the Howling Wolves, the Mighty Waters, and people like that, they came out of Mississippi. And in fact, I would encourage people who have not seen the film, and even if you have seen the film, to go get this book if you can find it. Buddy Guy, this is his memoir, When I Left Home, My Story. That's Buddy Guy. Watch for Buddy Guy in the film. The point is that the idea of migration is too often taken as a literal rendering among African people in a hostile social structure that should never tell our story. And what Ryan Coogler is reminding us of is that wherever we go, there we are. We take our culture with us, whether it be the mean streets and the Hawk in Chicago, or whether it be, quote unquote, down home in Mississippi. That's one thing. And the second of the two things is that road goes back and forth. It oscillates, which is why even the tradition, as we've talked about many times here, of homecoming. I don't care if you move to Chicago, Detroit, or Cleveland. I don't care whether you move to Buffalo, New York, or New York City. I don't care whether you move to Philadelphia, Bay Area, or Washington State, Seattle in particular. I don't care where you moved. If you moved to Iowa, like the Cohanna-Jones people did, or if you came up the Mississippi River into the Missouri River and left St. Louis and ended up somewhere in the middle like Pittsburgh, like August Wilson's folks, you did know where your people were. And now here we are in the second decade of the 21st century, so-called 21st century. What you're finding is people are returning, not to visit, but to stay, at least to reorient themselves, because wherever we go, there we are. So I'll come back to all that in a minute. I'm going to go. So I wanted to start here, and we wanted to start, Professor Hunter and I wanted to start with Slim in Hell, to remind us that the tropes that you see in Center are not new creations. In fact, they're very old. In fact, they're much older than even when Sterling Brown wrote about them. These themes, these ways of knowing, are things we brought with us on the boat. Again, evoking the Delroy Lindo character, Brother Slim, Delta Slim. And in that process, what we are engaged in week after week here, what Ryan Coogler did, which I think makes Centers a perfect vehicle, perfect text for an Africana Studies rendering, an Africana Studies approach. I think you have to have an Africana Studies approach. Anything else going to leave you thinking is too much. But again, Africana Studies is absolutely grounded. It has to be grounded, which is why I dismiss anything that's not doing this is not doing Africana Studies. It has to be grounded in the knowledges that have gone from mouth to ear, from life to life, across and over the arc, not only of centuries, but of millennia. We have never stopped being Africans. And when you sit in a film like Centers, there will be so much that is familiar. And then it's an invitation to know ourselves so much more deeply, so that the familiar becomes razor sharp in terms of what to do with that familiarity. And so, you know, it sent me back into our archive. I'm spending a lot more time with closing up operations here after this semester. And I was just doing some numbers in my head as I was riding the train down to Sirius this morning, and thinking about the numbers: 14 weeks of classes, 2, 3, 4 classes a semester. And then you start doing the numbers, and it came out somewhere north of 400 separate lectures and conversations since late August. And that's a lot of work. But all of that disappears now for several months. And of course, then when we get to Kemet in the first 2 weeks of August, that's going to be a grand time. Footnote: the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations ASCAT Conference opens Friday night tonight. We go through this weekend to next weekend. We'll talk about that more, but you can just go to ascac.org. It's free to register and to participate. And they'll send everybody the Zoom link, and then the social and the link to be able to participate. So if you want to do that, please do. But I was going through the archive. I'm gonna spend a whole lot more time in our compendium, in our bibliography, to kind of look at this. And Prof, I came on something about a year ago. Ancestors are fantastic. fantastic. If you don't come out of Sinners with nothing else, you're going to realize that your ancestors are real. And that our ancestors live forever as we live forever, not in the materialist, racial capitalist rendering that would produce a concept like a vampire. Think about Stephen King, who I'll come back to in a minute. Pet Cemetery, the line that was delivered, sometimes dead is better. But at any rate, the We're All Sinners session we had, Prof, about a year ago, was session 203. We were talking for some reason about Saul Williams. And as I'm going through the compendium looking for things, I went back and looked at that one, because at a moment you start talking about, you ask a question, because you were talking about watching Power and rooting for the bad girl, the bad woman, Queen of the South. You were talking about, remember, The Godfather, Sopranos, how these morally ambiguous characters become ones that through the narrative we are compelled to kind of root for, even as we see the destruction they're spreading, and how we've been conditioned to root. And you asked the question of all of us, you asked, how do we undo the systematic conditioning for us to self-destroy and to also sit silent in the face of destruction? So I'm looking at this is session 203, if y'all want to go back and look. It's a year ago now, not quite a year to the week, but close enough, a little over a year ago to where we are right now. And that question you see being addressed and attacked and in many ways resolved in Sinners. How do we undo the systematic conditioning for us to self-destroy and also to sit silent in the face of destruction? Sometimes you got to be still, but then you must act. And we see all of that there. So I want to go through these social characters for a moment. As I say, Ryan Coogler in one interview disabuses us of the idea of evil from the beginning. So you see the narrative in Sinners open up with a device that he used at the beginning of Black Panther. Again, I'm not going to go through the plot, but this is a device I think that is something to pay attention to, and it will be familiar. It's going to resonate with people. Some people going to say, "Oh yeah," but some people might say, "Oh, that's interesting." But let's just pay attention, right? Remember at the beginning of Black Panther where he has the Doma speaking to the child about the history of Wakanda. It's a jolly moment. Baba, tell me the story. And he's talking about how the meteorite fell from the sky. That's where the vibranium came from. Well, he does something very similar at the beginning of Sinners. And you hear a voiceover that frames the session. Ryan Coogler understands what Partate would call the Doma. The one who, among the jolly, which we know translates literally as blood, the idea that the function of the memory keeper in a society is the same as the function of blood in a human body. It circulates and keeps the body alive, removing impurities, keeping us healthy, delivering the delivery system for everything good. It's very important to understand. Well, you see that at the beginning of Sinners. And he understands that while the jolly has that responsibility, there's a subcategory, as we studied when we looked in office hours at Partate Ba's essay, The Living Tradition, the Doma, who, when they speak, when those women and men speak, they must speak with absolute accuracy to the degree that can be achieved by a human being. This is what happened. You understand? It's very interesting to see. And of course, the Doma are always accompanied by stringed instruments, which is what makes the juke joint scene one to sit with. Sit with that. Because it has elicited, I think there's probably no single scene in this 2+ hour vehicle that has elicited a stronger visceral reaction from African people who have seen this film than the scene. Because what you're seeing is a jolly, a Doma. And I heard you, Prof, I don't know whether it was when you were talking with our brother, Babo Matosho, Dr. Black, talking about the arc and the journey in real life of young Miles Caton, who played Sammy Moore, who sang his own song, the virtuoso, and talking about his mama, as y'all talked about his family. And so that's a Doma. That's a jolly tradition. But it's a Doma tradition, because when you give voice to that, see, in Western framings and renderings, which we have borrowed for purposes of convenience, it will be called the blue note. But it's not just the blue note. That's the delivery system. We had our last class in the hip hop class I teach in the Springs at Howard yesterday. and they're working on their final papers over the weekend. So I'm looking forward to reading some very interesting papers as we kind of workshop their ideas. And we talked about how the delivery system is the potent thing among African people. It's that note. But what you say over the arc of that delivery system can either kill us or bring us to life or somewhere in between. And so it was very interesting to hear them talk about that when you hear Miles Caton singing throughout that film. And you see certain moments when the blue note has as the delivery system the potency to arrest us. And then what is being said over the blue note isn't conjuring. That will be the rendering in the social structure. It is literally convening in a governance formation. And what is being convened ain't just the physical people dancing, ain't just the physical people moving in unison. It is literally the ancestors in the universe. And the correlation that Coogler had the genius moment to do, to bring the whole genealogy in that moment, elicits a visceral reaction, but it's also an invitation then to study. What is the importance of that stringed instrument? What is the importance of that combination of movement and the technology that enables it? You don't hear a doma without the music. It's very important to understand. Even as we have our week after week conversation, I'm very cognizant of the fact that one of the things that I certainly drew me and everybody else who ever heard him to John Henry Clark was the cadence and the tone of his speech. It was musical. And we often separate music from speech, but speech is music, because life and nature is music, as Randy Weston always reminded us. So, yeah, when you asked that question, it sent me back and it made me think about where we were. And Ryan Coogler, in many interviews, well, the few I've seen, read and then seen some voice to voice interviews, he immediately disabuses us of the idea that the devil is at the center of this concept. But he talks about Robert Johnson being at the crossroads and selling his soul to the devil. But then he quotes Papa Legba and Vodun, which means he's quoting Eshu and Ifa. You've got to make a decision. So the first thing we do approaching something like Sinners is take good and evil out of the equation. And that's why our conceptual categories become very important and useful in this. Because then you see people in situations where the culture will dictate how they move. And culture, of course, is what people do, not just as individuals, but as groups of individuals. And you see the debt that humans owe to each other because cultures bleed. There are no white people. No, that's not true. There are many white people. There are some white people. Let me edit as I speak. There are some white people in Sinners. But the categories of whiteness are also shattered. To think about the debt, for example, when you hear a group that is not referenced in Sinners, but I'll come back to them maybe, and maybe I'll just leave them here. I'll make this quote and keep going. You don't see nobody like Leonard Skinner. You don't see the Allman Brothers. You don't see, when James Earl Carter made transition, and we talked about some of those Southern bands, the bands I grew up listening to, in addition to the black music and the gospel and the soul and the R&B and the disco and everything else, eventually hip hop, but all that Southern country rock, I knew that. Leonard Skinner, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, same place where Aretha Franklin recorded "I Never Loved a Man the Way That I Love You" with that interracial group of session musicians. Skinner is there, but Skinner is derivative in many ways. It's a car crash, and when you come particularly to the Appalachian South, but even beyond that, even so far as Mississippi and everywhere else, you see the Irish. The Irish bring their culture with them on the boats as well. But the power of African culture is it absorbs everybody else's stuff and then resolves it like the Egyptians did. This is what I'm saying. We have to go all the way back in our memory. It resolves it into itself. The Egyptians never adopted anyone else's culture. In fact, there's a brand new book I just picked up by Toby Wilkerson. I thought I had it over here. Yeah, here it is. I haven't had a chance to really crack it beyond reading the description and then going through a couple of the first chapters. This is Toby Wilkerson's new book called The Last Dynasty: Ancient Egypt from Alexander the Great to Cleopatra. And in this book, he's talking about the period of the Ptolemies, the Ptolemaic period, Prof, and everybody who's gone with us or who we go to Kemet. That's where you see many of the late period temples. The temple that had the so-called Dendera zodiac, the temple for Het-Heru or Hathor, the temple of Isis on the island we'll go to. Those are late period temples. They're during the period of the Greeks. The Africans did it, but it was under Greek occupation. But here's the thing. The Greeks came to Kemet, and the Africans did not become Greek. The Greeks became Africans. Let's be clear about this. We don't go to other cultures and become them. That's why when one of us does, it looks so damn odd. But when Africa shows up, it absorbs the other cultures into itself. It changes the other cultures, and it adds to the African dimension. Because last I checked, even as you see other cultures in there, and I'll mention in passing the Mississippi Chinese. I had a student many years ago, about 15 years ago, a young man from Mississippi. He was an undergraduate student at Oberlin, and at the time, Howard University had a program that had a summer program where undergraduates from around the country would come to Howard and be paired with a faculty member to do research projects in the summer. Most of these young people went on to get graduate degrees, PhDs, and things like that. And I was assigned a young cat named Ted Chin. Young Ted Chin. Ted Chin was Chinese, but his family was the Mississippi Chinese, and he knew very little of it. So the first book I assigned Ted, we read together, was James Lewin, who did Lies My Teacher Told Me. He wrote a book many years ago called The Mississippi Chinese. And some people were introduced for the first time to the Mississippi Chinese in the film Sinners. Others knew about the Mississippi Chinese. Some people now are inspired to, is what Ryan Coogler, I'm saying, man, it should be a damn study guide to this movie. Maybe we're providing a little bit of a roadmap to something that could eventually be a study guide right now. But you should go look up the Mississippi Chinese, because you see the nobody is excluded who was in Mississippi in the 1930s at that moment, including the indigenous people who come in first. Like, yeah, this is where we from. We know what this is. You want to die? No problem. And I love, even in a moment when the husband and wife, the so-called Mississippi Chinese, as we were saying, the Yao character, Bo Chow, I'm sorry, Yao is his name. The brother plays Bo Chow, the husband, and Helena Hu, who plays Lisa Chow. You know, they got this store. And the references that were used, anybody in here who is Chinese, you know, this is Nubia and Knarrative, and of course, YouTube, we got people from all over the world. So if you are Chinese and you've had any contact or interaction with Chinese folk who were here in the United States, who go back more than a generation or two, and maybe even just now, if you've tapped into the longer arc of the relationship, I know I have some very good friends. My man Harry, who I see in the bookstores a lot around here, who worked for many years in bookstores here in the DC area, who also worked for many years at the Smithsonian, worked at the Natatorium, the aquarium between Baltimore and DC. Harry's a book guy. We talk a lot about his growing up in Washington, DC in the 1950s and 60s and going to school with black kids, and how he said, my daddy will refer to white people as white devils and black people as black devils. So if you pay attention in the film of the rendering from the allies of African people, because at a critical moment, black devil and white devil are the same thing. And it's not a critique as much as it is a grounding in a cultural predisposition that has you say, we are coming from our cultural center. It's a very complex rendering. And if we pay strict attention and kind of sit with the film, we'll see all these things emerge. And out of that humanity, as I said, there are white people in the film. There are some white people in the film, but they all ain't the same white people. The Klan white people ain't the same as the Irish. And the Irish, in many ways, are influenced by this African culture and want more of it. You see.
I didn't read it that way.
What do you think?
I think that we are the source, and that the Chinese capitalized off of our oppression, and they were allowed to serve both the whites and the blacks, but they did not fight for our liberation. They weren't alongside our liberation, and there are a handful, you know, we can talk about that. The Irish, again, were used on that plantation as indentured servants, and they allowed themselves to be grafted into this whiteness that also put them in another kind of bondage, but then allowed the system to be, they were the people to exact the lash as overseers. They became the patty rollers. They became the police. So in many ways, you know, their entree into whiteness didn't necessarily make them rich or powerful until we got the Kennedys. But I'm gonna say less about that. But you know,
it's important.
You know, but again, they didn't serve our liberation. They didn't help in that. And even that thing coming out, hearing that voice and saying I was drawn to it, he still wanted to take something so that he could use it to go back to his roots.
Absolutely.
And so we're the gateway, right? We're the source.
That's right. But what do you hear me saying? Because what I just heard you say,
allies. I'm saying they're not. They
no.
aren't allies.
I was talking about the Chinese. I'm saying you saying the Chinese
weren't allies. I mean, even if you think about what got them got,
I understand, but what I'm saying is that, and I guess, you know what, I think maybe it might be a distinction that I tend to trend toward the generous, with the idea that,
And that's I think the overriding message is don't let them in.
I
Period.
understand,
Nobody.
I understand that, I accept that, and I think, well, I say accept as if, again, I think that's a useful and necessary political posture for us to take, for sure.
At this time, I think more.
Well, maybe until for the foreseeable future, because again, just like there's a Mississippi Chinese, there's a Jamaican Chinese, and we certainly see in the development of reggae this is that central figure that helps Marley along, and you listen to him, you think he's Jamaican, you realize you made all the money. You and Chris Whitewell, as Peter Tosh would call Chris Blackwell, Island Records. So you're absolutely right. I agree with that. I agree with that.
And this when you said Ryan Coogler was dangerous, I thought that's because I was like, he's saying something to us at this particular time.
He certainly is.
Okay, and it's not about hating or putting people in these categories. It's not even like, it's self-preservation, but also the healing that the world needs. We have to be whole.
I agree with you. You know, in fact, I'm glad you jumped in there with that rendering, because it's compelling. It is compelling, particularly since it's very interesting in it as a writer, director, producer. And you never know how the sausage is made, but at a key moment when one of these characters says, "We agreed to help them, but not with this," what you see is, yes, this is a relational dynamic that is situational. It's contextual, no question. And there is a grounding that I think, well, what do you think about it? Should we, maybe grace was the wrong word, although that's typically my
Grace is the name. Was her name Grace?
Absolutely. Interesting, right? Oh, that's interesting. He's getting, and here's the other thing too. People might say, and I'm sure I would be one person to say, well, you can't assume that one person or one team of people did all this deliberately. I never would. In literary studies, I think they call it reader response theory. In other words, whatever was created is up to us to populate much of it with information. Because again, the way he has talked about in interviews, Papa Legba, to me, I'm like, okay, and in a minute, he's going to take that back to SU, because he's never going to stop studying. And as he's getting there, you can see the development, and I think it's interesting because of what Marvel did. In fact, I was talking about it with my students last week, this week, Black Panther, and how, as we've talked about many times, of course, the biggest comic book movie before Blade was DC, Superman. Now, and Wesley Snipes have picked up these cheap characters and licensed, and then Blade shows Marvel they can make this money. And he said, when Black Panther came out, even though I would have loved to make Black Panther, I'm glad we didn't make it, because they'd have had me on strings flying around or whatever, and we didn't have the technology to make it the way that Ryan Coogler made it. Some of this, and Coogler actually says this to Amy Goodman when she asks him about this deal that he has, the 25 years, after 25 years, it belongs to you. You get your money, first dollar off the top, before they make the 90 million, you get a cut. And he said, let me say a little bit more about that, Amy. He says, first of all, the deal I have is
not unusual.
It's not unusual. People do that. And then he said, which I thought was very interesting as well, he said, I was able to make that deal because it was my story and I had the ability to negotiate. So what the Marvel Cinematic Universe did, I think in a social structure rendering, they would call it a fluke or an accident or a happy circumstance. In a governance rendering, this divine order, this guy, he didn't catch lightning in a bottle. Y'all decided y'all gonna make all the money in the world. And then before you realized it, you were like, and we've talked about this, Killmonger gets killed 1 million times in the comic books. He's only supposed to be in the first movie. Them Negroes was like, what the hell? We agree with him. Just like you just said about the Chinese. I mean, oh no. And they had to bring Michael B. Jordan back. Now you got a monster on your hands that you can't kill. And he took advantage. He said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this with film number 5 or 6. But in this moment, when I got all the leverage and y'all can't get rid of me, I'm going to make the film of my heart. And when he talks about his great uncle, and he talks about his family, and he says, this is the film I wanted to make. I say, hey, man, if you don't never make another movie, right? It's like he took all that capital and negotiated. I don't know. Do you think we'll be watching this film 25 years from now?
Yes.
I do too. I do too.
Yeah. This is one of those moments, and I'm gonna say this, and I know you may disagree.
Mm-mm.
They Not Like Us in the summer shifted the universe in a way that I think very few people expected, because it wasn't a music battle. This was not a rap battle. This was a culture battle, and we can have that discussion about, whether Kendrick or whatever. But that man did go into the classroom and did study writing and did figure out, and he had a vendetta and he put it on, but it is bigger than, and he said it's bigger than the music. This film is bigger than film. And it's not just in the crafting of the story, it's how it makes us feel. But also for me, when I left that theater, I already felt like I could do anything.
Of course.
But I see it. I see it. And I see it in so many areas. And everybody that is somewhere right now in a place where they have a little bit of leverage, you don't ever have to sell out, because they don't have anything without you.
They don't have.
And that was the thing. That demon had to come out of the damn woods hearing that music, like, that's what I need. That banjo, he got that same banjo and them same damn river dance steps, but he could not produce or reproduce the power of that boy's voice.
That's right.
That could rip the veil, Dr. Carr, rip the veil.
No, it's true. The Irish banjo, while not completely derivative, the banjo is an African instrument.
Correct.
So like you said, even what he's using is not from you. You know what I'm saying?
They had the harmonies down. They were all of that.
Yeah, and
they not like us.
No, and I don't disagree about Kendrick. I guess, as I'm sitting there, even with that phenomenon, I celebrate the unity. I celebrate the delivery system, because I understand that cultural meaning making. Where I am compelled to draw the line is at the awareness that we're not there yet. And that there's a standard that we have to, because what happens is not for us, but there are people who would say, okay, this is the standard. It is absolutely not.
It's not. What it did was it cracked to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with
that. Just like everything's collaboration, you and me and you, like, I don't ever want to be in this space alone. Like
me neither.
I need catalysts. I need people to bang against. I need people that are going to push and prod and make me better. Right. And this is friction is the only thing that really creates that. But it's a crack, and it also draws a clear line, because it's art.
Yes.
But then there's movement.
No question. And the best art will do that. No question.
So that's it.
No, I agree. In fact, I agree with that. I don't disagree with that. I think it's an inevitable tension. It's a generational tension, which is why I often, say to younger people, particularly my students, that the very thing that you are saying in your moment is the standard, may be the thing when your children come along and say that theirs is the standard, you will reject. The longer you live, the more you study, which is why we had to create two separate categories. Often when we talk about those 6 conceptual categories in our Africana Studies framework, cultural meaning making speaks to that moment in time and space, and then movement and memory speaks to when you connect it. So, we were talking about that earlier. And Kendrick and SZA, Lamont was talking about Kendrick and SZA and comparing them to Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. And to me, I'm like, no. But I understand that in a cultural meaning making sense, that's absolutely the comparison, because you're not comparing. So when you hear All the Stars, for example, from Black Panther, and you hear, Kendrick, you hear SZA, that marks that moment in time and space. I have all the room in the world for it. But then when I'm listening to Ella and Louis, I'm saying that marked their time. So that's cultural meaning making. I get it. But when you move to movement and memory, how do you tie the generations together? The visceral reaction for people who feel proprietary about their time and space is, no, mine is the definition. It is for that time and space, but they will reject the idea that you have to connect generations together, at which point you've lost all human meaning, because not all human meaning, but most human meaning, because as Dr. Obenga used to tell us, you don't build a pyramid by dreaming. In other words, if you have a standard for how to cut, build, and pay, you have a standard for meta nature, you don't recede from that standard because you prefer what you're doing without being pushed. And that's a cultural meaning making conversation. And I'm saying all that as a prelude to this. No culture, and if you want to see it, all you got to understand is the Chinese. So even these Mississippi Chinese, in a moment, you see an Asian figure, which I got to track this down. I'm not convinced that was a Chinese figure. I almost want to say it looked Korean or Japanese, but I'm sure that wouldn't have been something that they missed, although no film is perfect. But I'll go back. My point is that what you see is, particularly for Chinese, there's an unbroken genealogy of 4,000 years and counting, which is why they sitting over there, Xi Jinping and them looking like, hey man, do what you do. We'll break you like Boston would. We're just going to break you anyway. But, you know, we're not negotiating with you and being very generous about it. They say, oh, the door of China is open when you're ready to negotiate. But what we're not going to do is do, you said, in fact, what they released this week, as we all talked about on the air, Chinese said, we're ready to negotiate. Our door is open as soon as you drop every penny of those tariffs. So we'll wait. Yeah, because they got 4,000 years of memory. They remember when y'all was running around trying to catch something to eat and didn't have no fire to cook it with. Don't be cute with the Chinese. And I'm saying for us, the gesture toward that is where we are now. I think that's what Black Panther represented. That's what Afrofuturism represented, which is why I'm very clear that Nnedi Okorafor is now saying, I'm not Afrofuturist, I'm African future. In other words, we have standard. And this is what Ryan Coogler gets deeper with in every iteration, because this film, he's gone past the Afrofuturist speculative dimension. Even as, it's interesting, even in Black Panther, I was looking at an interview with John Kani, the South African actor, the Xhosa actor who played T'Challa's father in the film, in the first film, and then coming back in the ancestral realm. But he said, we were on set when they were at the UN, trying to, sign the Sokovia Accords and, the superhero accords. And they were there in that scene where just before the explosion in Captain America Civil War. And he said, we were doing the scene, rehearsing the scene, and they said, cut. And he asked the director, why are we having this conversation in English? We're Africans. We Wakandans. We should be having it. And then the director said, well, what would you say to your son if you were speaking in your language, in Xhosa? So John Kani gives him a phrase in Xhosa, and then Chad Boseman says something like, what he say? It would be in Xhosa, it would be Nkosi Baba. Thank you. And John Kani was surprised. He said, what? Wait, how do you know that? And then Chad Boseman said, I spent some time in South Africa, and I was there. I was asking the people to give me some basic phrases. Good morning, good night, thank you, this kind of thing. And so when you said that, I recognized that and I gave it back to you. And it's, oh, that's how you end up seeing them speaking in Xhosa in Captain America Civil War. So even with that, what you're seeing is with this deep collaboration between Coogler and his cast, including, of course, Chad Boseman, who had a predisposition to seek the African when he came out of South Carolina, even before he got to Howard University, and then deepened it by study, including working at Know Thyself bookstore there on Georgia Avenue. But I'm saying that kind of thing pushes the envelope past a generic African or putting some print on or Igbo cap like you see in the All the Stars video with SZA and Kendrick. And I'm saying they're headed in that direction. So this isn't criticism, and it's an acknowledgement of what you're saying, that strikes that resonant chord. And it's also an encouragement for us not to get distracted by the idea that that's enough. And so I'm well aware, just like there are many jollies. I think Kendrick is a jolly. I think that SZA in some ways is a jolly, certainly in that collaboration. I think that certainly Ryan Coogler is a jolly, but I think that Adoma, the subcategory, is something for all of them and everybody else to aspire to, who's going to take that process as cultural meaning maker. And that Ryan Coogler is well on his way to Doma, a kind of Doma position. Like what I say is going to be as close to accuracy as we need as I can get to, because he's constantly improved. So yeah,
you're a Doma in this.
No, right? Well, I certainly aspire to it. Sure. But you know what? I'm glad you raised that, because here's where the challenge, this is where the challenge comes in. That's why we had to jailbreak the university, black, white, and otherwise. The Domas in our community are like Mr. James, who was Ryan Coogler's great uncle, who played the blues all the time. He said, after my uncle passed and I couldn't get back, he passed while I was in South Africa, I just started playing blues records, looking for him, trying to keep his voice in my head. And that led me to the seed of what became Sinners. Wow. That's yes. The domas in our community aren't at the universities. In fact, many of the people who lead us away from the domas are at the universities. And that's truly unfortunate, because what happens is they take our mouth to ear experiences, our mouth to ear knowledge, and try to shoehorn it into social structure disciplines. As a historian, no. As a social scientist, as an anthropologist, as an art historian, okay, that's great. You write all that. You keep that in that category called social structure. Who are we to other people? But our governance formations have to be unblocked. And so the idea then that that Coogler, and this is something else I want to mention just as we think about this, and then we'll kind of begin to wait a minute, let me see what I got here. Oh, let me do it over here. There we go. The Coogler leaves us to think about the process, his process. In all these interviews I'm looking at that he's given, I'm thinking about how he looks at, close this, put that there. He's talking about how he made this film and how he came to it. I just mentioned one. That's a governance conversation with his great uncle as becomes an ancestor. But he talks about not honoring these genres. And so for people, for example, it's for people here, I don't know if I want to see this. You know, I'm not into horror films. Not a horror film. That's the point of entry. And he talks about how he was talking with his wife, with his partner, and he had read, and this is the other thing that I'm very encouraged by Ryan Coogler. He'd be reading, not just reading film, not just reading music. No, he'd be reading books. You know what I'm saying? He said he had read Stephen King's book, Salem's Lot, a kind of thing where, and he said, I was talking with somebody, and he had an interview with Stephen King, and somebody asked Stephen King, if a vampire, his wife, it was actually his wife was talking with him. And Stephen King was like, what if a vampire came back to New York City today? And the answer he came up with, somebody said, if a vampire came back to New York City today, he'd get hit by a cab and run over. Then his wife was like, what if he came to a small town? That was the idea of Salem's Lot. And so that pours into the idea of coming into Clarksdale, Mississippi in the 1930s. The idea that they're coming from the big place to the small place where the thing will be intimate and the universal can be revealed in the intimacy of the particular. And then Ryan Coogler went on to talk about Peyton's Place, like Peyton's Place meets the vampires, And you see that small town trope. You see it in Get Out, the whole idea of intimacy. But I think the distinction to be made for whatever work that Get Out does, or Us does, or Nope does in terms of horror movies, because those are horror movies, whatever else Jordan Peele is doing, race at the center of those tropes, even as culture can't help but come in. You got Keke Palmer and them running around. You can't help but do it, even Lil Rel in some ways with the comic relief. But the point is, those are horror films. This is not a horror film. Horror is the point of entry. And Sinners, in the phenomenal dimension of it, is that a lot of people might coil at a horror film, but you won't feel like there are going to be moments, of course, of shock and horror, but it's more kind of accretive. There's moments of gore. You've seen all that in the previews, so it's not giving anything away. But the idea of vampire as metaphor is very strong in this film. And what made me think about is how, now thinking about the question of the intimacy of being in the South, being in Mississippi, being in Clarksdale, being in small towns, seeing those African people moving back and forth, all the white critics writing about the first part of the film is really a historical rendering. You see Jim Crow, Mississippi. Yeah, that's what y'all would say. Because the idea in many social structure renderings of where we live in the United States of America is that America is an alloy. It is, but it's a weak alloy, as we're seeing, because people like Junior Varsity Vance and Trump and them, and certainly Musk, who's a global white supremacist like Steve Bannon, they don't want an alloy. They want a white settler colony. And if you can't kill all the black people, all the non-white people, you certainly put them in the positions you want them to be in. Run real fast up and down the field, sing a few songs, and stay your ass out the way. But that's never going to happen. It was never there, and it's never going to be there. But America as an alloy is in many ways a function in filmmaking. We see popular films. The African presence in that alloy is often seen as additive, is often seen as who we are to other people. And the film that came to mind as I'm sitting there watching Sinners is another film set in Mississippi. You remember the Coen brothers, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
I love that.
Yes, I did too. But I also understand as an African that we're not centered. Remember, what's interesting is in Sinners, you see a character who the critics are linking to Robert Johnson selling his soul at the crossroads to the devil, that old rendering, when in fact, Buddy Guy is the guy people need to be focusing on. But that's fine, neither here nor there, blues musicians. But remember in Oh Brother Art Thou, the brother who was a blues musician, Curtis Thomas King, plays the character Tommy Johnson, riffing on Robert Johnson, and he's one of the merry band, the Soggy Bottom Boys, right? In constant sorrow all through them days. So you see the Johnny Cash, the Cash family, June Carter Cash, all those renderings. The soundtrack is fantastic, and you see all that. But the thing that's interesting is, to me, remember in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is, here we go with genealogy. It's a Southern roots, white roots really, with the Negro dashed in, rendering, a blues-ish rendering, roots is what they would call it. And Ryan Coogler talks about that in interviews, how, you know, the idea of appropriation means that all this music that was being created, black people would sing it, white people would sing it, and then the white people, they would give a different label so they could sell it differently. And he talks about, it's fascinating to hear him talk about even his process in making this film. But in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, they take as their foundation the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's the Greek story told through Great Depression era Mississippi. So the George Clooney character is Odysseus. And they say that. They got the Greek chorus, they got the whole thing. And I'm saying, hey, go with God. It's a beautiful thing. Guess what? We're getting closer to start doing these things for ourselves too. Because in Sinners, you see an African rendering, and I'm waiting for the Egyptian. Because we're gonna do this, shake on the Job set until we put our classical societies, our African classical societies, at the same foundation as everybody else do, whether it be the Chinese or these Europeans who have made up a foundation, by the way. The Greeks ain't had nothing to do with the English or the Germans, but everybody gets to invent a tradition for themselves. Fine. But in Oh Brother Art Thou, I thought the interesting thing for me in looking at the film, remember near the end, they've been caught by the sheriff, the guy with the mirror sunglasses, a gesture back to Cool Hand Luke, I think, in part. And now they're going to hang them. And the brothers are digging the ditch. And the brothers who are digging the ditch start singing this song. You got to go to the lonesome valley. No one can go there for you. That's a song that was sung by the Fairfield Four. Fairfield Four came into existence as a trio in Fairfield Church in Nashville, Tennessee in 1921. The Fairfield Four, who are in the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. You know, that song is a song I think about every time we go to Kemet. When we go to the tomb of Seti I, perhaps the most extensive and well-preserved tomb in the Valley of the Queens and Kings, an incredible rendering with all this ways of knowing written on the walls, well-preserved. As I'm coming down, we walking down in there, oftentimes I'll start humming to myself, you've got to go to the lonesome valley. We all got to confront that awful day will surely come. None of us are going to get out of here physically alive. And as I thought about that, I was just thinking about that in the context, because near the end of the film in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, they face death, the inevitability of death, and then they are rescued miraculously. I guess Deus Ex Machina, in that case, it was the water itself. But that origin story of Africans and sinners takes what is a necessary element in the alloy of America, as represented in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, and reverses the centrality. What is centered is the African. So when you see Delta Slim, of course, a man who, as I talked about before, when you see Delroy Lindo, who is a master, and Delroy Lindo basically playing himself. It's like, my God, that's my Samuel L. Jackson. He doesn't disappear in the role comes to him. Now, I remember when Delroy Lindo said that here, as April 27th is, of course, the birthday of August Wilson, and his African play, some people call it the piano lesson. I like to think of Joe Turner's Coming Down and Gone as well. And Delroy Lindo played Harold Loomis, Harold, Herald, almost like an angel, Loomis, in Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And occupying that African ways of knowing in Joe Turner's Come and Gone, the August Wilson valence, and seeing a similar echo in Sinners. Sinners is not August Wilson. However, as August Wilson was to the stage in Joe Turner's Come and Gone, in some ways, Ryan Coogler's Sinner is to the screen. So for some people, I would encourage you, if you've never seen or read because they haven't made Joe Turner's Come and Go into a film yet. I know Denzel Washington is aspiring to bring all that stuff to the small screen, and that's beautiful. And the piano lesson was well done. I don't know how they're gonna get Joe Turner's Come and Go, but I swear, if you can get Delroy Lindo to reprise his role as Harold Loomis, I hope you can do that, Brother Washington. But in many ways, what we're getting to is the point. And as Ryan Coogler says in some of these interviews, even as he has said, you know, I'm a foundational Black American. My people been here for centuries. They came through slavery, and that's catnip to the ears of the descendants of slaves community, and they fight in the FBA, ADOS. I don't get into any of those acronyms. But then he follows hard on the heels of that, sometimes precedes that by saying we are Africans in America. There is the missing piece. Because even as we're talking about lineage and we're talking about going to court and getting reparations, all that very important conversation, we must understand that our strength is not being tied to the social structure of the United States of America. Our strength is in being Africans. Our strength is in being Africans, right or wrong, as John Henry Clark would say. When you come from somewhere else and you are still in the place that you are in your fullness, you then have some place to leverage and negotiate. Ryan Coogler made $2 billion, and he says this in the interviews too, which I thought was very interesting. As he told Amy Goodman, he says, you know, what we're doing here is very interesting to me in terms of this film, because it's really looking at film as art and film as commerce. Oh, film is commerce. And then he said, she asked him, you know, how important was it for you to do this deal? And as you said, as we said, he said, this ain't unique. Other people have done it. He said, but I had the leverage to be able to do it. And he said, I thought to myself, I've sacrificed a lot. My family and I have sacrificed a lot. We've been very fortunate. And over the arc of this last decade, I've made close to $2 billion. I've made close to $2 billion making films that will always be owned by other people. I said, shit, you better talk, young man. That's what I'm saying. So he said, when he said that, he said, I made close to $2 billion by making films that will always be owned by other people. Now, think about that in the context of historical memory. If you tie yourself exclusively to this place, he said, we came from Africa, but it really starts with slavery. And that's why you know what you just did? You just cut off, and you're going to always be making your culture for other people. In America, but no, self-determination don't start here. Self-determination here is anchored, which is why when the Lindo character said we brought it with us on the boats, that's a quick line. Pay close attention to the dialogue, because what he's saying is we are in Mississippi, but we are Africans in Mississippi. And at those moments of power, those spirit centers in the film, it ain't the American experience. It is that underlying, I mean, when you know, and again, not to go through the narrative and the plot, but that, you know, listen, the spirit centers of this film are the spirit centers of Africana ways of knowing. And my goodness, you know, when you move into a space, when Annie shows up, when Wumi Masaku, when that Nigerian by way of England shows up, you're looking at the spirit center. There are things that can't harm us when we connect to who we are. And those things came with us on the boat, as you and Dan, you know, talking about. So it's important to understand those connections. And I'm kind of beginning to wind this up, this Black self-determination. In many ways, these major themes, as I said, Black women, you know, people say, well, he's a man. How's he writing women? We think about Spike Lee in that question. Well, he is a man, and he's got a partner who is a woman, his wife, his partner, and they doing everything together. And there's a collective, as you just said. Nobody wants or needs to be isolated. I think there's a collective shaping this. Family and communities at the center of this, from the core to the center. The emptiness and the dead end of race, another huge theme in a social structure category. It's very important to understand that, because we understand the poverty of whiteness and materiality. That's racial capitalism. What is a vampire, after all? A vampire feeds on other corporal entities, other humans, the material dimension. And for what? To sustain its life. But guess what? What happens if you can't feed? Then you die. Do you die? This is a clash of worldviews. This is a clash of worldviews. Whiteness is a vampiric formation. I'm not talking about people, as James Baldwin would say, who think they are white, because you can give that up. But if you embrace whiteness, in other words, if you embrace race, which means whiteness over the last 5 centuries, if you embrace that, you have now embraced a vampiric culture. The only way it can sustain itself is by preying on others. The ordinal classifications Jacob Carruthers writes about in Science and Oppression, the idea of the other, you've got to prey on it. If the other covers its neck, if the other covers its body, you're going to die. But the other has to invite you in at this stage. And what we see there is, when you combine that, then what you're talking about is race. And what you're also talking about is materialism. Because the idea is that life begins and ends with the physical form. And if what you're aspiring to is everlasting life, you've got a choice to make. Thinking about Slim in hell at the end of that poem, when Sterling Brown says once Slim goes back up to heaven, and St. Peter said, well, you got back quick. How the devil? And what's his latest trick? And Slim say, Peter, I really can't tell. The place was Dixie that I took for hell. Then Peter say, you must be crazy, I vow. Where in the hell do you think hell was anyhow? Get on back to the earth, because I got the fear. You're a little too dumb for to stay up here. So the idea then that if you're aspiring to live forever, and after a short moment of discomfort, everything will be fine, what you really have done is concede your worldview, your world sense, your ways of knowing, your movement and memory, and then using your cultural meaning making, the vampiric culture in that social structure is now going to prey on you. And in exchange, you get a moment of materiality that you can extend a little bit longer with a few more gold coins or whatever it takes. But you might end up in that body for the rest of eternity, meaning what? You are now trapped in racial capitalism, unsatisfied, yearning for the other thing that if you would just simply give yourself over, you would realize from the governance formations you came from and the ways of knowing you came from, the real thing is the thing that you've given up in pursuit of the thing you've been diseducated to pursue. So on the outside, it looked like you made the right choice, and that would only be true in a Western rendering. It's very important to understand that. So let me kind of the attention to this piece, to Sinners, not only as a piece of art, critically acclaimed, but as a piece of commerce and self-determination is very important, because the ability to negotiate comes from being able to own what you have. And so at a critical moment when the question is asked in the film, what was the best time of your life? Pay close attention to the answer, because in that answer, you will see the distinction between the social structure and the governance formation. You will see the distinction between the ways of knowing and the clash, which is why this is not a race film, it's a cultural film, because the answer is a cultural answer. And that self-determination that these brothers Smoke and Stack are determined to plant in the place that they come from, their origin place, at least in a nominal sense, over the last several centuries. And I should pause here to say that what Ryan Coogler has said in interviews is that with every subsequent film, he's deepening it. He said, with Black Panther, I got a chance to connect to Africa. With Creed, I'm looking at the local conditions of African people in places like Philadelphia and others. He said, with this film, I'm in Mississippi. He's putting the pieces together. What is being revealed is an unbroken genealogy. That is the powerful thing. And the genius of it, which I would agree with, They Not Like Us, it taps into it as well, is that the resonant chord of our memory, whether you want to call it epigenetics or anything else, the resonant chord of our memory responds to that more than anything else. And the irony is that in a country where we've been trapped for 400 years, almost, some of us, the fact that the people in this social structure configuration still can't recognize that we continue to be Africans should make everyone laugh. Of course, we were going to see this film because it speaks to us. Well, why is it making up? Y'all still don't understand that we never stopped being Africans. You still are laboring under the illusion that somehow we are figments of your imagination and creations of yours. But that self-determination is the key. We can have this conversation because we have narrative and we have Nubia. Something we build week by week, day by day, subscription by subscription, participation by participation, class by class, that is self-determining. Contraband Camp being written by Africans for Africans to the world. This whole Black Star Network, penny by penny, donation by donation, being built. You can say what you want. And that also allows the places we don't control to be reanimated. If you don't think that these conversations we have don't impact Black spaces that aren't under our control, including HBCUs, which are not under our complete control, then please, we're not paying attention, including white schools, including any formation that we don't control. We talk about what should we do? Trump is doing this, these executive orders, and they trying to, guess what? We continue to build this. And as we build this, we can then from here, not only influence, but reconfigure all of that. We're in the negotiation phase. And so again, just this idea, Ryan Coogler doing what he did, talking about his great uncle James from Mississippi, going there the first time and evoking guilt and wonder for himself that sent him to study, I think is very important. Going to the Doherty plantation where he said, as he said in interviews, this is the place they say the Delta Blues was born, Charlie Patton and them. He's going there with his collaborator, Ludwig Göransson, right? This white boy out of Sweden, named for Ludwig van Beethoven, but his father, who was with them, his 70-year-old father, who was with them on this journey to Mississippi, was fulfilling a lifelong dream, because since he was his son's age, younger than his son, and the British the British musicians, like the Rolling Stones and them, started bringing over Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and them, and the father saw them, became enamored with them, learned blues guitar, and when his son got old enough, taught him the blues guitar. Then he meets Ryan Coogler when he's at USC, and they in school together. You see the connection being made. These are phenotypically white people. They're also geographically Europeans, Swedish to me in particular. But the respect for that culture allows for a collaboration that moves beyond. He said that he researched Baba Mal, the Malian Jolly, for Black Panther, which is why you hear that string instrument at the beginning of Black Panther that you're going to hear again at the juke joint in Sinners. These resonant chords are re-Africanizing us by having us have awareness. Now, Mississippi is America. This is a brand new book called Mississippi's Black Cotton by MacArthur Cotton, who was a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Oh, y'all can see that, Mississippi's Black Cotton, with John Obie. Nicole actually wrote the foreword to this. This brother is a fascinating figure. He was field secretary, one of the field secretaries for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That's MacArthur Cotton. He served as chairman of the Attala County NAACP and the Attala County Democratic Party. He's a board member of the Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. Mississippi does not operate from a deficit. A racial rendering of Mississippi would say it's the poorest, but culturally, it is in many ways one of the centers of Africana cultural meaning making in the world. And to understand that, you've got to put it all together. You mentioned Beyonce, and of course, watching the film, it was a great moment to remind us of the work of Africans who put all that together. The great Robert Ferris Thompson, right? The book that you see Beyonce with in the first part of Formation, not Formation, Black is King, that we talked about, and we'd have to get the number. Black Gods and Kings. This is the book that you see her flipping through in the video of Black is King. This is Robert Ferris Thompson. 4 Moments of the Sun, Congo. If you want to talk about crossroads, you got to talk about the Kikongo people, because between the sunrise, sun at noon, sunset, midnight sun, there's the Kalunga line. That's that line. And once you put that intersection from the sun at noon to the midnight sun right here, being at the crossroads there, that's why you do the crucifix. That's why you cross yourself. And that's why a blues musician standing at the crossroads can talk with the force that will make you choose. Not an evil force, but a force that forces you to choose. Because in that liminal space, that's why when the Congo people made those first crucifixes, when they came down and tried to turn them into Christians, they said any human being that could be at the center of the crossroad must have all power, because you're sitting there. He ain't dead. He's alive. So I don't know why y'all trying to Christianize us. We're the ones who gave the world the whole notion of time and space as it operates in that way. So in many ways, that juke joint becomes the crossroads. That juke joint also becomes the center of power. And when you evoke the power, when you evoke the blue note, when you evoke the collective movement, when you open to the ancestors, yeah, the roof will catch fire. And every iteration of your ancestors that have ever been and every one that will ever be are going to be there in the same time and space, because what you've done is center yourself in an African that eliminates time and space as a liminal experience and puts it together as all happening at the same time. So when we sit in a space like that, the critic's not going to get that. Could they get it? Sure, if they took the time to study, but they don't know who we are. And they've never had enough interest in finding out, because I suspect if some of them know, if they did find out, now what you going to do? There's nothing you can do. You know, not a horror film. Another film that came to mind as I'm sitting there looking at it, remember Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, which was fascinating to me. Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, I always thought was an interesting. And I'm looking.
The book was so good.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and see, okay, yes. Well, give us a quick reaction, then we'll wrap up for tonight. But when you say that, when you think of that, Abraham Lincoln.
I mean, I think of the barn scene on the plantation, that and how it centered something that I never considered, because all of the books about slavery, that kind of thing doesn't really. I don't think the movie captured the book very well.
No, not at all. No, well, I say not at all. I think what the movie did was invite us into well, it kind of poked at it, but of course you're right. The
And it
convention
made a cartoon when it was really a lot of little history nuggets dropped in the book that I didn't expect. It was
absolutely. And you know, it's interesting you say that because Harriet Tubman gets short shrift in the movie.
Yep.
And Harriet Tubman, when we look at her, the Africana rendering, I think it's fat because, you know, there's this whole conversation in Africana communities about Harriet Tubman as a shapeshifter. Harriet Tubman, like, how could she escape? She was a shapeshifter. She knew how to hide in plain sight. She could disguise herself because she knew the elemental forces. As an astronomer, I mean, it's all those kind of that recentering is what makes that fascinating. And you're right. There's just a poke at it in Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, the movie. In the governance formation, we've talked about all those, the idea that they're brothers, they're cousins, there's a relationship. They're actually the same people in some ways. Again, Slim Greer, Sterling Brown can do it with one person. And in this case, Michael B. Jordan and Ryan Coogler and the crew did it with two. But the splitting allows for the fullness of the individual to be expressed across the range, which is why it's very interesting. The family community is there, the ancestors. I mean, again, Wumi Masaku paying very close attention to her. The fact that, you know, you got the one sister with the one brother and the other woman with the other brother representing those racialized forces. And Ryan Coogler, what do you think of his choice not to make the character that ends up on the other side? Well, is she white? Is she white?
No,
she's not. No, she is not. And I think that is critical.
but they don't know. White
well, they don't know, which speaks to ambiguity, right? And the ambiguity and the idea that, well, let me ask you, in the sense of the Chinese.
Wait, before we do though.
Yeah, okay, come on, that's right. What you thinking?
Those that are wearing the veil of whiteness.
Yes.
I mean, let's think like a Tim Scott or, you know, like you had the proximity. In her case, phenotypically, they can't tell. She was the one that went out after she was told we're good. We don't need what they have out there. No, let them go.
There you go.
And it's that also, you know, because I know them.
No question.
See what I'm saying? But
yes, but think about, I mean, this character,
and because she's actually family, she's the breach. And
therein lies the issue. Going back, you know what? Now, hey, y'all, we're having this conversation in real time. Again, Sterling Brown clearly whispered in our ears and said, I want to begin on this. Of the elements that he identifies in the Negro and American fiction and drama, the one he's probably best known for is the tragic mulatto, the octoroon. As she described her genealogy, 1/8 black. Exactly. I mean, so I'm like, man, y'all playing in our faces. No, you're not playing in our faces. Y'all are taking this seriously enough to give us enough to work with in a piece of popular culture art. So we ain't going to a film house to see this film. This is a film that lives at the level of deep cinema, but it's so accessible because you got a young man, which is why I'm convinced that this is one of the reasons we will go see Ryan Coogler. He's been layering and he loves us enough to take us seriously enough to, as you say, have us to take ourselves seriously. And that's the genius of this. You know what I'm saying?
So we were happy with Wakanda because it, you know, it doesn't exist except in our minds and the possibilities, but it doesn't exist. This exists.
This exists. This exists. Dr. Wilkinson, I see you, the newbie. That's our sister. She said it right. Slave culture called it. Sterling Stuckey's book, Slave Culture. The thing is there. We don't have to go into an imaginary future. All we got to go into our memory bank, and it sits at. So you're absolutely right. So the sister with Haley Steinfeld, who played Mary, interestingly enough, the octoroon, 1/8 named Mary. So I mean, he's playing in the face of Christians too. I wonder what Otis Moss has to say about. I mean, all the tropes that he's bringing into this to have us shocked out of our lethargy. If you're going to believe that, then you got to believe it in full. You ain't got to chase nobody else. Everything you need is here. Don't invite into your space something that's going to lead to your endangerment. And understand that everybody got on, what did old folks you say? Every tub sits on its own bottom. In Chinese, like, we got a place to stand. I'm going out here and fight. What you doing? No, we didn't sign up for this. What the hell? maybe we shouldn't have let you. I get you, like you said. It's very powerful. He says this in Entertainment Magazine. He did an interview. And then think about this in terms of our ways of knowing category and start wrapping this up. In that juke joint scene, Coogler said, for a second, you feel so present that you almost feel immortal. I said, he's paying attention. Because that is how you rupture time and space.
That's right.
He said, for a second, and look, when you evoke that thing, when that dome, when you caught, for a second, he says, this is a direct quote, for a second, you feel so present that you almost feel immortal. That's what immortality is. It's presence.
And when you don't know the power of the other side, when you don't call on it, when you've been conditioned to demonize it or to think that you are not able to fight at full force.
Yes.
That scene where the veil was blurred, not even blurred, it was very clear.
It wasn't blurred.
It wasn't blurred. It was very clear. It's right there. It's right there.
It's right there. That's the genius of it, isn't it?
If you can't see it,
we're gonna help you. We're gonna help you. We're gonna help you. It's not enough to respond out of pain. Again, that tension, because here we are in this age, and every day is 50 more executive orders. Every day is no. Don't respond with that shock. Be still. Watch them old folks. How do you think Ryan Coogler's family got out of Mississippi and got to the bed? How do you think we got to this moment? It wasn't by responding to every no, just hey, listen. And you're right, it was right there. It's okay for us to love us. It's okay. And I tell you, I haven't seen Holly Greenman don't see Hollywood movies. So I don't know how we're gonna get him to see Sinners. He's gonna have to see it because everybody watching it, and ultimately he'll just begrudgingly watch it. But as somebody who pioneered lighting and reading the credits and looking at the credits and looking at the people that Ryan Coogler thanked in the letter, one of the people he names is one of Holly's best students, who's of course real close with Ava DuVernay, who did the lighting for Selma and some of the stuff, Brother Brad. And you can see these are folk who have been studying Black people. Holly was a master of lighting. He one of the pioneers and how to light Black people for film. This is so well lit. This is the love is in the technique too. Going to the next category, science and technology. How do you light Black actors?
I was thinking Daughters of the Dust.
Absolutely, Julie Dash. Absolutely. And it's so funny. Julie Dash's partner on Dollar in the Dust, AJ Arthur Jaffa, is from Mississippi. He'd been trying to make a Mississippi film for a long time. In fact, he was down there. He was telling how they were talking about going. All of this coming back to that foundation. And there she is in South Carolina with Daughters of the Dust. The lighting, that's Karima and him. That's his colleague at Howard. When you light Black people like that, it doesn't just make the skin pop, doesn't make the tones pop. It draws us into our love affair with ourselves. When Michael B. Jordan walks into that yard, puts that little bouquet of flowers down and goes in their jar and sees Wumi out there shining with that. And it's like every color in there, the whole color palette of Africa. And then in terms of science and technology, what's she going to do? I'm about to refresh your gree-gree, your juju bag, because that's what's going to save your life. I mean, it's there. You know what I'm saying? Do not reject the thing that will save your life. And your life is not your physical life. Your life is the eternity of life. You're looking at the wrong thing. You're looking at racial capitalism. You don't want to be in that body forever, do you? You really want to be in that body? Or do you want to be happy? You know what I'm saying? So this is the choice. This is what Southern Brown is saying. Oh, you ain't ready to come up here. Going back down there to earth and water earth till you ready to come back slim in hell. He said, what you think the South was, man? Oh, you went down there thinking it was no. All those choices, cultural meaning making, almost at the end. Icons, shrines, totems, and rituals. The film is filthy with those. That Delroy Lindo character. When I saw Delroy Lindo when he came to Howard about 7 8 years ago and said, when I was doing Joe Turner's Come and Gone, I knew I had nailed it when I looked out on the stage on Broadway and I saw this Black woman sitting in the front row with the most frightened look she had in her whole life. And I know I had nailed the character. I almost wanted to apologize to her when we got off stage. But no, your job is to embody the full range of Africanity. And so what are you doing? I'm deadening myself to the realities that surround me. I'm going to drink. I'm going to get this little money. But then you're going to revive my hope. And in that moment, I'm going to remember not only who I am, but who I need to be for y'all. I got this. Don't even worry about it. Because guess what? We all going to see each other on the other side anyway. This is when you lose your fear. This gesture is very important. And so, you know, as I said, I'll end with movement and memory, because we've been talking about it all along, that sixth category. What remains for us as we leave this theater and then go back and watch it again and come back is to continue to remember, is to continue to link our stories, where we are from physically, where our people are physically, and then link that to the countless generations before us and the countless generations after us, to link those to get that momentum of memory. We do that, we're gonna be just fine. So we're all sinners. We're all watching Sinners. We're all in the middle of a criminal enterprise. We're all looking for redemption. But the simple fact of the matter is, everything we need, we are equipped with. And that's going to be, you know, that's our challenge.
Amen.
Amen. Amen. What you got? Oh, good. Yes.
Hear him say it.
Yes, please.
Let me just say this too. Thank you, Dr. Carr.
Thank
Before
you.
we play this, thank you. I want to thank you. Have and not single-handedly, because again, collaboration is everything.
Yes, ma'am.
It's everything.
We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. So that thanks is circular.
Yes.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
I'm going to embrace that. But again, all of us have a role to play in the thing.
Yes.
So ask yourself, what's my role?
That's it. That's it.
Busy. So
make your film. Ryan Coogler said, make your film. Whatever that metaphor is, don't be an aspiring whatever it is you're gonna be. Be it. Go ahead and be it. We're gonna help. We here.
And 60 trips around the world, because we won't see you around this ball.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we won't see you on Sunday.
Yeah.
We're gonna be in prayer, and I'm thanking the Lord for your daddy and your mama and every ancestor that came before them, because all of that is in you, and because of you, we will definitely make it.
I say, and I think the divine divinity and the ancestors for you. I know you talk to your mama, which is a beautiful thing to be able to do. Everybody on your birthday, call your mama if you can. And the day you can't, you can talk to them all the time, because that's exactly what I did want to do with my parents. So I love you. Thank you so much. Well, I'll see everybody Monday night, but yeah, let's see what Ryan Coogler got to say.
All right. Ashe.
And talk about what you negotiated in making Sinners, the arrangement you had with Warner Brothers. The New York Times reports Warner Brothers agreed to spend $90 million to make Sinners and agreed to give you a cut of gross ticket sales, now rare arrangement known as first dollar gross, meaning before they recoup their costs, you're getting money as well. Warner also agreed, and this is absolutely key, to relinquish its ownership of the film to you after 25 years. The Times reports, quote, some rival film companies were horrified that Warner Brothers would give a film away even after a period of time. Talk about these key components of your contract and why this was so critical for you, Ryan Coogler.
That's a great question. I mean, what I will do is I'll maybe add some context that maybe those articles didn't add. I'm not the first filmmaker to get any of these deals, you know. And Warner Brothers is not the first studio to provide these deals to a filmmaker. You know, so like I think that a lot has been made of my deal in particular. I'm not totally sure why. You know, I have my guesses. You know, but I've been in the industry long enough to know what kind of deals are possible, and nothing about this deal is a new thing. You know.
What's your guesses, Ryan?
It's not a I'd rather not say. but you know, like the attention on what's happening with this project, you know, outside of it as a piece of art and as a piece of commerce has been very interesting, you know. But for me, you know, this film was very important to me. As a writer director, I've made over $2 billion at the global box office. I'm not yet 40 years old. It's taken a time, commitment, energy, and I've missed out on a lot of things in my life. Making films that will always be owned by other people. For this one, because it was so personal, and because I had the ability to negotiate. I asked for a few things that were very important to me for this project. And for what it was about and what it meant to me and my family. And thankfully, I was able to get those things I was asking for from Warner Brothers.